Welcome to another episode of the our series on the architecture of reality. This is the 30th episode. We're rolling right along, and often when we look around at the present, we misdiagnose what's going on because we don't really know where we are in the history of the philosophical conversations that have been going on. We think too practically or too momentarily, and so we get the story wrong about where we're at. And when you look at the left-right divide right at the moment, a lot of times we think of the left as an extension of the hippie movement, and there's some truth to that because of the affinity with communism amongst the hippie movement, and then the affinity with communism in the present. But what is difficult sometimes is the questions about violence, right? Because the hippies were anti-war, anti-violence, peace and love, and the modern leftist movement is obviously it is very violent, is pro-violence. It's showing itself to be pro-war and pro-manipulation, and the hippie movement positioned itself as a free speech movement, and the current left is an anti-free speech movement. And so you see some things like that, and you go, I don't understand. How did that become this? And there is some transformation, but one of the things that we don't realize is there was another, um, uh, maybe deeper philosophical movement that goes back to the secular movements of previous eras, especially the secular humanism, but it's sort of an secular anti-humanism movement that came out of New York in the 60s, in terms of where it came into the American story, or where it began becoming influential in the American story. There's a great documentary. It's great in the sense that it's really well made. It's trying to call something positive, which is actually negative. But it's called The Velvet Underground. It's on Apple Plus right now, and it's about the band The Velvet Underground, and really broadly about Andy Warhol's. It's called The Factory, his kind of artist commune studio in New York, and it was famous for the parties that it threw. It was a very hip hangout, and uh, but in the factory was a, a developing philosophy that both was reflected in um, Andy Warhol's paintings, as well as in the Velvet Underground, and kind of the proto punk rock, or proto grunge, depending on where you look at it. All of the music that it was the Velvet Underground, and all the bands at the time, and you see them doing things like the Velvet Underground purposefully tuning to other frequencies. They would be in tune with themselves, so to speak, but they would tune to other frequencies outside of the 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 and like an A, they would tune it down 40 hertz and tune everything to that in order to um, sound off, even though they sounded on. Right? They were on with themselves, but they were off with the world. Uh, or Andy Warhol's, you know, printing. They also did a lot of filming of what you might call um, nonsense, uh, filming nonsense or story-free movies, um, as well as being purposefully, doing things that would purposefully objectify people, especially women. A very, very low view of women. They were used um, rather than honored, and you see this whole movement. It was considered very hip, very philosophical, and what it was the entrance of philosophical nihilism into America. Now, we usually think of nihilism in terms of morality, nihilism meaning that you don't believe in morality, but there's a metaphysical nihilism that reality isn't a thing, right? That we define, that our mind is what defines reality, um, that the only reality is the reality in our mind. That philosophical nihilism was central to this movement, and it was very violent. It was perverse sexually. There was a lot of there were similar things going on in the Bauhaus movement in Germany, but it came to America around this time as well, and where there was a lot of a lot of homosexuality, a lot of but it was philosophical in nature. It wasn't just uh, sort of what you might think of as pure lust. You couldn't help yourself. It was, I don't believe in reality. I believe everything is a construct, and so we reject gender, right? Because uh, gender is a construct, because everything is a construct, and so that mentality um, really gets in and gets going there in the factory. And from there, through its hipness, so to speak, it spreads throughout the rest of the country. And eventually, now you look around and you see it's everywhere in the universities, that metaphysical nihilism, that philosophical nihilism. And what's important about it is it's anti-human. So, because once you buy into the idea that humans don't have a nature, that there might be biology in there, but the biology doesn't isn't pulling out of nature. The biology is there randomly by means of evolution. The biology is there randomly by means of the pressures from outside. There's no nature within a particular human being. Uh, Once you have that, the ideas of freedom, the ideas of human value, all of those immediately go away because it's really just all power. So every attempt to tell a person what they are is power. So this happened in France, in both in the right before the revolution and then again in the French existentialist movement, where you have philosophical thinkers like Camus saying uh, that that we create ourselves, right? And then coming to the conclusion towards the end that you can't actually create yourself because you came from somewhere, right? So you can't be God because you have a beginning. And he says it makes him nauseous to even think about the fact that he has a beginning, that he didn't create himself. So it's not a new movement, but it's really new and comes into America. And that philosophical nihilism is really what's at the base of the modern leftist movement, right? It's a secular anti-humanism. It's a doesn't believe in humanity, that humanity is a thing, that humanity has a nature. And so if there's no nature, there's no proper use of humanity. There's no proper use of yourself. There's no proper use of your body. There's no proper use of society. None of those things make philosophical sense in that setting. Uh, and then the current right is a kind of secular humanism, right? So that there is a proper use. The difference is, instead of it being derived from being made in the image of the triune God, the right at the moment is fighting the anti-humanism with a secular form of humanism. Now, secular humanism has more space for Christianity, and that's why so many on the right are able to defend the the movements on the right with a clear conscience, right? Because it leaves room for Christianity. But it is not yet even a return to a Christian way of thinking, right? Because secular humanism is not was the way out of Christian humanism. Now, for a lot of people, we're seeing it as a way back in as well. So the road that was taken out of Christianity, out of Christian humanism, is turning into a road back in for a lot of people. You're seeing people become Christians all over the place on the right. So um, it's important that we don't just you know, run away from the situation, because you can't become yeast can't work on the loaf at a distance. But when we think of the modern left um, as an outworking of the hippie movement, and realize that it's actually an outworking of this American existentialism, this American anti-humanism, this American nihilism, then we can't make sense of it, because it looks just like a form. Well, it is a form of insanity. Nihilism is it. In kind of a technical sense, it's a rejection. It's a dislodgement from reality. So, uh, um, so the documentary is worth watching out of curiosity. It's not going to teach you anything in a positive sense, but it's worth watching out of curiosity. But one of the things that's amazing is watching kind of the fawning over this movement. One one person in the I can't remember who says it in the documentary. He says watching the Velvet Underground, it was like watching the great Renaissance, the great Renaissance artists work. Um, watching Michelangelo, and you think, how can you compare the Velvet Underground to Michelangelo? That almost feels like satire, until you realize that Michelangelo's art fully embodied the worldview of the time. Right? It was a full commitment to the worldview of the time, and the Velvet Underground was the reason that they um, resonated with so many people. Was it was a full commitment, a full embodiment of the nihilism. And you had lots of people sort of beginning to think that, and evolution was changing the way people thought about things, but they were still living on the fumes of Christian Western civilization. And the Velvet Underground gave a full rejection and a full embodiment of the rejection of Western civilization. So they looked into Eastern music. They detuned on purpose. They embraced kind of the ugly on purpose aesthetic, and then they, uh, uh, you know, the most famous song that they ended up having um, uh, was "Take a Trip on the Wild Side," right? And so, which was then covered again. I was it covered by Marky Mark? I'm trying to remember. I think Marky Mark covered it again. Uh, and so it became popular again in the 90s. The 90s was really when that movement kind of entered the mainstream. And the Wild Side, it is about homosexuals and transvestites at night. What they do, um, and it is really the way that nihilism is fully embodied and enters the American consciousness, right? Is through this movement, and then through the 90s when it's popularized. So um, it's a uh, it's a helpful documentary in that sense, um, and that philosophical nihilism, unfortunately, it's now in common parlance. When you say, well, gender is a construct, um, that doesn't that's nonsensical if humans have a nature. It only makes sense if humans don't. And a lot of times we want to say, no, gender is not a construct. Um, Makeup really is only for girls, that sort of thing. And we don't realize that that doesn't make sense to what other people are thinking and saying, because we're not addressing the actual root, which is the metaphysical question. Do humans have a nature? Does it mean something to be a person, or does it not? And if it doesn't, then we have to provide the meaning, because the meaning is not inherent, and that's the conversation I think that's more helpful.